Something that often goes underlooked is the fact that every goal scorer in the NHL tells a different story. Multiple players can arrive at the same amount of goals, but the paths that each player took to get there are completely different. Take, for example, the 2014 NHL entry draft. Of the 3 NHL forwards who have scored the most goals as of the time of writing, you have Leon Draisaitl leading the pack with his 399 goals, but not far behind him is David Pastrnak, who currently has 391 goals to his credit. This shouldn't be too surprising, as both were first-round picks, but something's different about player number 3. He was a third-round pick and the 46th forward taken in his class overall. To expect this forward to become one of the best players of his class, well, that usually doesn't happen. And yet, that player is Brayden Point, the Lightning superstar with 2 Stanley Cups to his name. When all is said and done, he'll go down as one of the premier goal scorers of the modern era, but perhaps the more interesting story revolves around how he came to be a unique, one-of-one player in a league filled to the brim with high-end scoring talent. Since the 2016-17 season, the year Brayden Point made his NHL debut, only 7 NHL forwards have managed to score more than 300 goals. Point is one of them, and it is here where he finds himself in the company of NHL superstars like Nathan MacKinnon. Furthermore, when we limit the scope to just include 5-on-5 goals, we observe that Point has the 6th most 5-on-5 goals by a forward, sandwiched in between the aforementioned MacKinnon and Kyle Connor. We make this 5-on-5 distinction to emphasize the fact that it's really difficult to maintain high levels of goal scoring at 5-on-5, especially over a large sample size. This is because the opposing team is at full strength, and therefore there is more opportunity for a player's offense to be stifled. However, something that becomes very evident with a bit of a look under the hood is how little Brayden Point shoots the puck compared to other NHL forwards. After all, it's only natural to assume that most goal scorers would want to fire the puck on net as much as possible, right? Well, if we go back to the list of forwards with the most goals since the 2016-17 season, and include the player's total number of shots in that time span, you'll notice that Point sticks out relative to his peers. Every player above him has at least 2,000 plus shots except for Leon Draisaitl, and even Draisaitl has 300 more shots than Point. Switching back to 5-on-5 for a moment, we see the same phenomenon occur. Point's 1,070 5-on-5 shots pale in comparison to the 1,500 plus 5-on-5 shots some of his peers have taken. Here, the example to use is Nathan MacKinnon. Despite only scoring 7 more 5-on-5 goals than Point in the same time span, it took him almost 800 more shots on the dot to accomplish that feat. This discrepancy might seem strange at first, but is actually perfectly reasonable. As you might have guessed, the hidden variable in play here is shooting percentage. At 5-on-5, Nathan MacKinnon has a shooting percentage of just 9.74% compared to Point's 16.36%. MacKinnon shoots more often, but Point's shots are much more likely to become goals. One way to illustrate the latter concept is by looking at how Point's shooting percentage stacks up to the rest of the league. Here we find that Point's 5-on-5 shooting percentage of 16.36% is the highest shooting percentage by any forward with at least 500 plus shots since the 2016-17 season. To put it in layman's terms, no forward in the NHL has scored at a higher efficiency than Brayden Point under the given circumstances. Even as his sample size increased into the thousands of shots, and you would expect his shooting percentage to taper off, it instead has held steady. We can confirm this by looking at his year-over-year 5-on-5 shooting percentage since the 2016-17 season, and for comparison, the league average forward is also denoted. Point entered the league as a 13% shooter at a time when the league average was about 9%, so he was already above the curve as a rookie, and since then he has consistently been well above the league average. Whereas the league average forward has only improved somewhat marginally, Point added 3 whole percentage points of shooting percentage between his already spectacular rookie season and his most recent career average. This is why he was able to climb to that 16.36% number. Every single season he shows up and shoots at least 13%, and to be honest, he hasn't shot lower than 14% in 7 years, so it's perhaps more accurate to say that these days he shows up and shoots at least 14%. 1 or 2 seasons of high shooting percentage can be excused as puck luck, but every single season of his career, that can't be dismissed as luck. All Situations paints the same picture. Point has the 3rd highest shooting percentage at all situations among forwards, this time finding himself behind Draisaitl and Scheifele. Looking at Point's progression relative to the league average forward, he started out shooting a nonchalant 14% and has gone on to eclipse the 20% mark 4 times in his career, 3 of which came in the past 3 seasons. Meanwhile, the league average forward began this period of time with a shooting percentage of 10.74% and has climbed roughly 2 percentage points. Point doesn't just start out ahead of the league average forward, year over year he continues to outgrow them. minimum. Point could have leveled out as a 15% shooter at all situations and still be well above league average, but he's quickly reaching the territory where he might hit 20% as a career average. Mind you, there are NHL forwards currently playing who have never reached the 20% mark at all in their career, and Point is out here making it look easy. To put it bluntly, his worst season is some players' best season, and that is a distinction that does not come lightly. With that being said, it is here where our basic counting stats have fulfilled their purpose and we must delve into the realm of advanced stats to continue forward. Up to this point, we have treated all shots and goals equally without much regard for shot quality. Of course, this is not the case in reality. Sometimes a goal is the result of a perfect shot and other times it is the result of a lucky bounce. With this in mind, we need a statistic that can track shot quality and help us filter out the noise. Luckily for us, that is exactly what individual expected goals does. It looks at the quality of a player's shots and churns out an output value that gives us our best estimate of how many goals we could reasonably expect that player to score given some sample size. Bringing the focus back onto Point, he's one of just 35 NHL forwards to have both 100 plus 5-on-5 individual expected goals and 200 plus expected goals at all situations since the 2016-17 season. The significance of this achievement lies in the fact that getting into the 100 and 200 clubs is no easy feat. Even the best players by individual expected goals in recent times top out at about 20 to 25 expected goals per season at 5-on-5 or roughly 40 to 50 at all situations. Therefore, the fastest a player could theoretically reach this lofty goal is after about 4 to 5 seasons of consistent top of the league play. On top of that, a hopeful player has to stay healthy, continue to be one of the league's most dominant players even as the league evolves and adapts to them, and then they have to keep it up for half a decade. It's hard, and there's lots of room for an injury or down year to derail the whole thing. It's no accident that some of the league's best goal scorers currently in the league find themselves as members of this group, as some notable names include Alex Ovechkin, David Pastrnak, and Zach Hyman. Part of being a great goal scorer is putting yourself in the position where you should be scoring hundreds of goals with evidence backing up that claim from both the eye test and analytics like expected goals. That's why it's not just accuracy or luck that elevates Point into elite goal scoring status. If Point was merely coasting off of shooting percentage, his individual expected goals would be significantly lower, and we diagnose the situation as a player punching above their weight. Instead, his high expected goals total backs up the dominance we see from Point, telling us definitively that he deserves to score as many goals as he does, because even though he shoots less than his peers, he's still finding himself at the top of the league standings in individual expected goals, mainly as a result of really good shot quality. To do that consistently over nearly a decade requires a blend of talent, skill, and technique all coming together to create something great. We can further use expected goals to complement Point's excellent finishing ability. Goals scored above expected is the difference between a player's measured goals and their expected goals, and we can use it to see which players are scoring more than expected, less than expected, or as expected. Starting with 5-on-5, Point has amassed 43.97 goals scored above expected, the 8th highest mark by any forward since the 2016-17 season. That puts him in the company of guys like Kyle Connor and Patrick Laine. The same praise is deserved at all situations, as Point's 78.6 goals scored above expected is 10th among forwards, and here the comparables are Mikko Rantanen and Mark Scheifele. Building on his all situations figure, we see how goals scored above expected is the intersection of shot quality and shooting percentage. 36 NHL forwards reached the 200 plus expected goals at all situations benchmark, but over 80% of them failed to score 300 plus goals in the real world. Of the select few that did manage to reach 300, the average shooting percentage of the group was about 15%. As is evident, good shot quality is vital, but it isn't enough on its own. A player must also have finishing ability, accuracy, or whatever you want to call it. Point had both. He had the 227 expected goals and the near 19% shooting percentage. It was the perfect blend of factors that helped him cross the 300 goal mark with an extra 3 goals to spare. Take away either and the machine would no longer operate at peak efficiency. On a team as good as the Tampa Bay Lightning, it's only natural that some might be inclined to say, well, Point has a 3-time Art Ross trophy-winning teammate dishing him the puck. Anyone can have success in that situation. Well, there's an entire regular season where Point didn't play with Kucherov at all. The 2020-21 season where Kucherov missed the entirety of the regular season while recovering from an injury. Did Point look any different? Not at all. In 56 games, he still scored 23 goals, shot over 17%, and had a high expected goals total to his name. Extrapolated over 82 games, he was on pace for another 30 plus goal season, 20 plus expected goals, and in all likelihood another season of shooting north of 14%, which is what we've come to expect out of Brayden Point. If anything, he was on pace to beat his previous year's stats, even though Point spent 82% of his ice time with Kucherov in the 2019-20 season. It must be noted that this season was special in that teams only played the 6 to 7 other teams in their division, and only 56 games were played instead of the regular 82, but there is a legitimate case to be made that Point's play actually improved despite the absence of Kucherov. For Furthermore, even in the years where Kucherov did play with Point, he has only directly set up about 38% of Point's goals he's scored so far in his career. On a season-by-season basis, he's only directly set up more than half of Point's goals just twice in 8 seasons, or twice in the 6 seasons where Point has played more than half of his minutes with Kucherov. And even then, his highest mark is 56.5%, just a little bit more than 50%. In fact, 2 of Kucherov's 3 Art Ross Trophy-winning seasons came when he directly set up Point less than half of the time, headlined by his 2018-19 season where he had 128 points. At the time, no player had managed to have 128 or more points in a season since Mario Lemieux and Jaromir Jagr last accomplished such a feat in the 1995-96 season. And yet, Kucherov still only directly set up 37% of Point's goals that season. Now, you might wonder, why is this emphasis on directly setting up Point, represented through primary assists, so important? Why exclude secondary assists? Well, secondary assists are highly prone to volatility. What constitutes a secondary assist changes from play to play, and therefore their value rapidly becomes murky and unclear. Primary assists, on the other hand, are consistent. A player has to directly set up the goal scorer in order to be credited with a primary assist. As such, we defer to primary assists. None of this should be construed as to say that Point doesn't need Kucherov, or Kucherov doesn't need Point, but rather it should show that Point is a pretty good player in his own right, even before Kucherov is added to the mix. Together, they complement each other's strengths to the fullest. We see the results of such cooperation in the playoffs. During Tampa's back-to-back cup runs, Point scored 28 goals, and no one else on the team even came close to him. In fact, that is the highest number of goals in back-to-back postseasons in the salary cap era, as Johan Franzen is the only other player to have 25-plus goals combined between back-to-back postseasons, doing so between 2008 and 2009. You have to go back to the early 90s to find the last players to have 28-plus goals between back-to-back postseasons, with Kevin Stevens and Mario Lemieux both over 30 goals between the 1991 and 1992 Stanley Cup playoffs. Suffice to say, it's a high bar to clear, and a lot of great playoff scorers, some of them Hall of Famers, never made it that far. But Point doesn't just dominate in spurts either. At this point of his career, Point's played an entire regular season worth of postseason games, plus some change. What's stunning is that his cumulative playoff stats look a lot like his marvelous 2024-25 regular season campaign. Over 40 goals, 30-plus expected goals, and he's still shooting near 20%. It's one thing to do this in the regular season, but the postseason? The games get tighter, the quality of competition increases exponentially, and despite all that working against him, Brayden Point still plays like a 40-goal scorer under the brightest lights of the postseason. Dominance like this is rare to see. It really is. And when you lose players like this, they're hard to replace. In the 2022 Stanley Cup playoffs, Point left Game 7 of Tampa's first-round series against the Maple Leafs with an injury to his leg. He wouldn't return until the opening 2 games of the Stanley Cup final, but it was apparent that Point wasn't at 100%, and he was shut down for the remainder of the series. Unfortunately for Point and the Lightning, the Avalanche would close out the series in 6 games, denying them their bid for a 3rd consecutive Stanley Cup. While the Avalanche celebrated on the ice, questions began to pop up. What if Point hadn't gotten injured? With Point on the ice and healthy, Tampa was firing on all cylinders, scoring roughly 3.6 goals per 60 minutes that postseason. Without Point, or when he was just playing through injury, Tampa's number dropped to just 2.77, almost a full goal lower. Would the Lightning still have been defeated by Colorado, or would they have captured their 4th Stanley Cup in franchise history, cementing their dynasty status at the same time? We'll never know for certain, but given everything that's built up to this moment, it definitely seems like a healthy Point could have been the difference maker, in a career where he has been nothing but a difference maker.